Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Intimacy Lab. Let's begin with a question that may hit closer than you expect. Have you ever stood at the edge of a breakup conversation thinking, if I could just give her closure, she would finally let go? You rehearsed your words, softened your tone, maybe even offered apologies that didn't truly reflect your emotions, but still, she lingered. The texts didn't stop, the signals felt confusing, and you couldn't understand why your carefully offered closure seemed to open up more space for contact rather than create the distance you thought she wanted. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many times, a woman who says she wants closure doesn't really want to end the story. She wants to feel witnessed. She's not waiting for your logic. She's reading your emotional temperature. She's sensing your detachment, testing whether you are as unmoved as you pretend to be, or whether you're still emotionally invested enough to react. Closure, in this sense, becomes less about answers and more about reaction, about provoking something in you that assures her she mattered. And this is where so many men misunderstand what's unfolding, because what she really wants may not be an explanation at all, but a particular reaction from you that speaks louder than any words. So here we are, right in the thick of it. You've probably felt this before, that uncomfortable, almost bewildering moment when a woman you've shared something with, a relationship, a connection, intimacy, looks at you and says, "I just need closure." It sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? Closure. As if it's a final chapter, a necessary conversation that will tidy up emotions and let everyone walk away feeling whole and at peace. But why, then, does it so often feel like nothing gets resolved? Why does it leave you feeling trapped in a conversation that seems endless, where every answer you give opens a new question? Every attempt to explain turns into a deeper labyrinth of feelings. Let me tell you this, when a woman asks for closure, what she's really asking for is your emotional engagement. She's not just asking for an explanation of what went wrong or why it's over. She's observing you. She's watching whether you can meet her in the place of emotion she's sitting in. Can you show that you feel what this means? Can you demonstrate that this connection was not just a chapter you're ready to close and walk away from, but something that touched you deeply enough to stir a reaction? You see, when we talk about closure, we often imagine it as a polite handshake, a civil farewell, a neat ending. But real emotions aren't neat. They're messy, contradictory, layered with longing, resentment, curiosity, regret. And for many women, especially those whose attachment runs deep, closure is not the end of a story but the beginning of an inquiry. Do you still care? Do you still react? Does this ending matter to you the way it matters to me? And so, my dear listener, this is where your first misunderstanding begins. You may think she's looking for logic, for you to explain your side, to offer clarity. But in truth, she's reading your tone, your presence, your silences, your hesitations. She's paying attention to your reaction more than your reasons. Have you ever noticed that sometimes when you give a perfectly calm, rational explanation, she seems even more upset? That when you approach the conversation with cool detachment, thinking you're helping her let go, it only makes her question things more, pull you back in, escalate the emotional temperature? This is because your emotional distance doesn't give her what she's looking for. What she craves, and this is essential to understand, is an emotional mirror. She wants to feel that her significance in your life has left an imprint, that even as you say goodbye, she has touched you deeply enough that you can't simply walk away unaffected, that you are stirred, moved, even if you don't intend to reconcile or return. This isn't manipulation. This is human longing. We all want to know that we mattered. And for many women, closure becomes a test of that meaning. If you seem too calm, too unaffected, it suggests that perhaps she never touched you at all, and this can feel unbearable. So when she says, "I just want closure," ask yourself, is she asking for information, or is she asking for recognition? Is she looking for a timeline of what went wrong, or is she looking for confirmation that this ending matters to you too? This doesn't mean you have to perform grief or fake emotions. But it does mean being present, being honest, being emotionally available enough to acknowledge what this ending represents, not just to her, but to you. And this leads us to something important: presence. Your presence, your willingness to sit with discomfort without retreating into explanations or dismissals, is the first reaction she's looking for. She wants to see whether you can stay emotionally engaged long enough to show that this relationship was real, that even though it's ending, it carried meaning for you too. So many men think they are offering kindness when they stay calm and rational, but kindness in this context is not about smooth explanations. It's about bearing witness to what is ending. It's about saying, yes, this mattered to me too. Yes, I am affected. Yes, this is hard for me even if I know it's necessary. Can you allow yourself to sit in that emotional space, to not rush to close the book, to recognize that endings are just as meaningful as beginnings? Think of it like this: if at the beginning you were curious, attentive, emotionally invested, why then, at the ending, do you imagine that detachment is what's needed? Why withdraw your emotional availability at the very moment it matters most? And here's where the deeper lesson lies. The reaction she's looking for is not necessarily a dramatic outburst or a desperate plea to stay together. She's not asking you to fall apart. She's looking for your humanity, for you to reflect, even in parting, that she mattered. It is in this human reaction that she can begin to truly let go. Because letting go is not just about understanding why something didn't work. It's about feeling seen, feeling that the story you shared together left an impression. Now, there's something else that often happens at this point. When a man doesn't give this emotional reaction, when he stays cool, detached, distant, a woman may feel compelled to keep circling back. The breakup becomes an endless loop, not because she can't move on, but because she never felt acknowledged. Without that acknowledgement, she is left holding not just her own grief, but the invisible burden of wondering whether she ever truly mattered to you. So you see, it's not about the words you say, it's about whether those words are carried by emotional presence. That's what she's feeling for, that's what she's testing, that's what she's waiting for. And you may ask, why does this matter? Isn't it enough that I'm ending things respectfully? Yes, respect is essential, but emotional respect requires more than polite words. It requires empathy. It requires staying long enough to honor what is ending, even if it's uncomfortable. Because, and this is where we begin to shift our understanding, what she really wants is not for you to explain it to her. She wants to feel you acknowledge the loss, not just with logic, but with presence, with vulnerability, with a willingness to be affected. This is the paradox. The more emotionally present you are at the ending, the easier it becomes for her to move on. Not because you solved everything, but because you honored the relationship, its significance, and her place in it. So as you navigate this conversation, as you sit across from her, or speak on the phone, or even write that final message, ask yourself, am I giving her what she's really asking for? Am I offering explanations, or am I offering acknowledgement? And this is where we begin our exploration together, because this first step, presence, is only the beginning. Presence creates the space where real closure can even begin to exist. Without presence, without this first reaction, nothing else you say will truly land. And so here you are sitting in this delicate space where presence matters more than answers, where the weight of what she's feeling needs not to be solved, but to be held. But presence alone isn't enough. Presence is just the doorway. Once you've stepped through it, she is looking for something deeper, something that every human craves when they feel vulnerable: validation. You might think, but I've already explained everything. I've been respectful, clear, and honest. Isn't that enough? The truth is, Validation is not the same as agreement. You don't have to agree with her version of events, and you certainly don't need to backtrack on your decision if your choice to part ways is clear and necessary. But what you do need to do, if you want to help her truly close this chapter, is to validate the emotional reality she experienced with you. It sounds like this: I can see how much this has hurt you, or I can feel that this isn't easy for you, and it's not easy for me either. Validation is about reflecting back her feelings without defending yourself, without arguing about details, without fixing. When you validate, you're saying, I recognize that what you're feeling is real. That acknowledgement allows her to soften, to begin letting go of the need to rehash every detail, because finally someone is seeing what's under the surface of her questions. You may have noticed this dynamic before. The more you try to explain or rationalize, the more she seems to escalate, but when you offer a simple, genuine reflection of what she's feeling, everything begins to calm. This is because validation gives her a sense of being seen and respected in her emotional experience. And here's the subtle art: validation doesn't mean tolerating accusations or allowing yourself to be blamed unfairly. It means standing firm in your boundaries while honoring her emotions. It's an emotional skill, not a weakness. Let's take a simple example. Imagine she says to you, "You never cared about me as much as I cared about you." Your instinct may be to jump in defensively. That's not true. I did care. I showed you in all these ways. But notice how that response keeps the conversation stuck in debate. Instead, what if you said, I can see that you felt that imbalance deeply, and I hear that it's painful for you to have felt that way. You don't have to argue about whether it's objectively true. You are acknowledging her experience as valid and meaningful. And it's in this acknowledgement that she feels, perhaps for the first time, understood, not corrected. Not dismissed, understood. That is the second reaction she's looking for. Not a counter-argument, but an emotional resonance that says, your feelings are real and matter, even if I don't see everything exactly the same way. You can almost feel the shift in tone this brings. It transforms the entire energy of the conversation. Instead of two people locked in opposing narratives, you become someone who is bearing witness to her truth while holding your own. At this point, something else begins to emerge. In her request for closure, there is often an undercurrent of testing your emotional awareness. She may ask questions that seem repetitive or even unfair. But if you loved me, why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you stay? These are not always literal questions. They are emotional probes. What she's really asking is, did you even notice how I felt while we were together? Did you see me? Do you see me now? And this is where your validation becomes an act of deep respect. Instead of answering literally, well, I didn't fight harder because XYZ, you can lean into the emotional reality. It must have felt lonely for you when I pulled away, and I understand that loneliness hurts. That kind of response does something profound. It honors the emotional space between you. Even if you are parting ways, it allows her to feel that her feelings were not invisible. This validation is what she's looking for far more than your reasons or explanations. She doesn't necessarily need a new analysis of the relationship. She needs confirmation that what she felt was real and valid. This is especially important for men to understand, because we often live in a culture that teaches men to explain and justify rather than simply listen and reflect. You may feel uncomfortable doing this. You may think you are opening yourself up to being blamed or drawn back into conflict. But, paradoxically, the more you validate, the less likely she is to continue pressing. She will sense that you see her humanity, and in that moment she may find what she was really searching for all along, the dignity of being understood. And I want you to hear this deeply. It is not about letting yourself be dragged into drama. It is about showing up with emotional maturity. About saying, I can hold this conversation even if it's hard. I can reflect back what you are feeling without needing to defend myself at every turn. This is what many women secretly wish men would understand, that the request for closure is not about facts or timelines, but about feeling emotionally recognized in their experience. So as you sit there, maybe at that kitchen table, maybe in the car, maybe standing at her door one last time, the second reaction she's waiting for is your validation of her emotional reality. It's a subtle but powerful act, and when you offer it sincerely, you create the conditions where she can finally begin to release this chapter. Now, from here, something else naturally unfolds, because presence and validation open the space for the next essential element, the thing that often makes or breaks this entire process of closure. So here you are, sitting across from her, having moved beyond presence into validation. You've offered your full attention. You've acknowledged her feelings without defensiveness. You've honored her experience, but still, the conversation lingers. It lingers because beneath all of this, there is something deeper she is waiting for: your ownership. Ownership is where your emotional integrity meets your self-awareness. This is the third reaction she's longing for, not an apology alone, not an explanation, but a moment when you take responsibility for your part in how the relationship unfolded, in how the distance grew, in how the dynamic felt from her side. And this is so crucial. Ownership doesn't mean self-blame, and it doesn't mean crumbling into guilt or regret. It means recognizing where you were absent, inattentive, distracted, or emotionally unavailable, not to undo the ending, but to dignify the journey that got you there. Imagine this: you've been validating her emotions, and then you go one step further. You say, I realize now that there were moments when I withdrew because I didn't know how to communicate my own fears. I can see how that must have felt like rejection, and I'm sorry that I didn't speak more clearly at the time. Can you feel the power in that? It's a different energy than simply explaining. It's the energy of a man who has reflected on himself, who understands the weight of his actions or inactions. This is what many women yearn to experience when they seek closure, not just your presence, not just your validation, but the assurance that you've actually understood yourself and your contribution to what went wrong. When you take ownership in this way, you disarm the cycle of blame. DEFENSSI, into one of shared shudang to HUMANITY. Walk away not because you're bitter, but because you've grown. This is when you'll see her soften. Because what she really needed to know is that her pain made an imprint on you, that you did not walk away unchanged. And there's something beautiful about this, because ownership is not about reconciling the relationship. It's about offering respect for the relationship itself. It's about saying, even if we are not right for each other, I honor what this was and I've learned from it. This is a profoundly healing gesture. It gives her permission to begin writing the next chapter of her life without carrying resentment. It gives you permission to leave this relationship not as an escape but as a completion. But this is delicate work. Ownership must be authentic. It can't be delivered like a script. It can't sound rehearsed or feel like a performance. Women have a sharp radar for authenticity. They will feel it immediately if your ownership is shallow or simply designed to get through the conversation quickly. So the question is, can you take a moment to really reflect before you speak? Can you see clearly the patterns that emerged between you? Can you recognize where you shut down, where you missed opportunities to connect, where you withheld yourself emotionally? This is where real growth happens, because the gift of ownership is not just for her, it's also for you. When you can articulate your part honestly, you begin to free yourself too from the cycle of repeating the same mistakes, from the avoidance of your own emotional blind spots. Now, it's worth acknowledging, this is hard, especially for men who have been taught to hide vulnerability, to avoid admitting mistakes for fear of looking weak. But here's the paradox: when you take ownership from a place of calm strength, it doesn't weaken you at all. It shows maturity, it shows leadership, it shows emotional intelligence, and women, especially women who have shared intimacy with you, notice that. They respect that. Even if it's over, this is the moment when she may feel a surprising warmth toward you, because now she sees you not as distant, cold, or avoidant, but as human, as accountable, as capable of growth. Ownership also closes another loop, her need to seek answers elsewhere. When you offer genuine ownership, she doesn't need to keep circling back through mutual friends or ruminating late at night, wondering what really happened. You've given her a clear acknowledgement that you've understood what this relationship meant, how it affected her, and how it affected you. And this, too, is a form of respect, closing the relationship in a way that neither party feels erased. So I invite you to ask yourself honestly, what did I withhold? Where did I disconnect? Where did I fail to show up as my best self? Not because I'm a terrible person, but because I'm human and imperfect. When you answer these questions and express that answer vulnerably to her, you offer something few men ever offer at the end of a relationship: dignity. It's the dignity of saying, "This didn't work out, but I learned something from loving you, and I can see how my behavior affected you, not just from my perspective, but from yours too." This moment is where something shifts. You're no longer two people trapped in competing narratives. You're two human beings honoring the complexity of what you shared. And that shift is what allows for a real ending, a true letting go. So as you sit in that conversation, wherever it's taking place, whatever the history between you, ask yourself whether you are offering not just your presence, not just your validation, but also your ownership. And when you do, that's when she begins to relax her grip. That's when she feels seen and respected at a level deeper than most men ever go. That's when you both begin to set each other free. So now we've arrived at a tender and revealing moment. You've offered your presence, you've validated her emotions, you've taken ownership for your part in what unfolded. But if you sit quietly in this space, you will notice something else surfacing, something almost unsaid, almost hidden behind the words and tears and silences. She's not only seeking closure or acknowledgement, she's looking for emotional proof. Emotional proof that she mattered, that she still matters in some way, even as this chapter ends. And this is where the next reaction she's yearning for often appears, sometimes in subtle ways. You might notice she brings up moments of tenderness from your past. Remember that trip we took together? Do you remember what you said to me that night? Or she might mention how special certain moments felt for her. What's really happening here is that she's testing the memory, your memory of intimacy. She's reaching back to see whether those moments meant as much to you as they did to her. She's searching for emotional resonance. Did I leave an imprint on you? And here is where many men make a common mistake. Feeling the conversation is dragging on, they try to politely deflect. Yeah, that was a good time, but let's not dwell on the past. Or worse, they brush it aside completely. That's irrelevant now. But what she's doing in this moment is profoundly human. She's not dragging things out to prolong the pain. She's looking for assurance that her presence in your life was meaningful, that she didn't just pass through you as a fleeting figure, but that she touched you and stayed with you in some real way. Can you offer her this? Can you meet her in that moment and say with warmth, "Yes, I remember that night so clearly, it meant a lot to me too at the time"? Notice, this isn't about reopening the door to reconciliation. It's about giving her the gift of confirmation that she mattered, that she was memorable, that you were present and awake in those moments too. This is the emotional proof she's seeking, not that you should come back, not that you regret the ending necessarily, but that you can honor what you shared without diminishing it simply because it is ending, and this is a profound act of grace. Too often, endings are marked by coldness, defensiveness, or an almost brutal practicality, as if by cutting the cord quickly and clinically you can avoid pain. But that coldness often wounds more deeply than the breakup itself. What a woman yearns for at this stage is to know that she didn't imagine it all, that what she felt was real for you too, that even if you've outgrown the relationship or it no longer fits, the moments you shared together were genuine and significant. And the beauty is, when you give her that, you are also freeing yourself. You are allowing yourself to remember that love, at its best, was real, even if it wasn't permanent. This is something many men struggle with. They think that acknowledging beautiful moments from a past relationship somehow weakens their resolve to move on. But in fact, it does the opposite. It allows both people to part with dignity, to remember the connection without bitterness, and to leave the story as two whole, self-respecting individuals. In this space of emotional proof, there is a delicate power. It's where the final echoes of the relationship can be heard clearly, where both of you can hear not just what went wrong, but also what went right. And that hearing is healing. So the next time you find yourself in this conversation and she reaches back to a shared memory, don't shut it down. Let it breathe. Let yourself acknowledge the goodness that once existed between you. Let yourself say, that was beautiful for me too. Because when she feels that, when she knows that her presence in your life was meaningful, it eases her grief. It allows her to carry the relationship as a chapter in her story that she can remember with warmth rather than resentment. This is what it means to offer her a graceful exit, to leave her feeling that she wasn't invisible, that her love wasn't wasted, that her emotional investment was honored even as you both prepared to walk separate paths. And in doing this, you give yourself something invaluable too, the freedom to walk away without bitterness, without harshness, without cold detachment. You walk away as a man who can hold complexity, who can respect what was even as he chooses what will be. This is a different kind of masculinity, one that is rooted in emotional strength rather than emotional avoidance, one that understands that love can be honored even at its end. So as you continue this conversation, notice those moments where she brings up a memory, a gesture, a word from the past. And instead of retreating, lean in gently, offer that emotional proof. Yes, I remember. Yes, that mattered to me too. This is what allows both of you to leave the relationship not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two people who shared something meaningful, something that, even in its ending, deserves respect. And it's here, in this delicate, graceful acknowledgement, that the relationship truly begins to close in a healthy, wholehearted way. So here you are, having offered her your presence, your validation, your ownership, and that graceful emotional proof she needed to know she mattered. But there's one final reaction she wants, even if she never explicitly asks for it, and this is often the one most men struggle to offer because it requires a kind of maturity and generosity that we aren't always taught to cultivate, a blessing, not a blessing in the religious sense necessarily, but an emotional gesture that says, I want good things for you even as we go our separate ways. This is the true close of the circle, the final thread that, when gently tied, releases both of you from the tangle of confusion, resentment, longing, and regret. Because what's at stake here is not just whether she feels seen or validated, it's whether she can walk away with dignity, knowing that even though you couldn't continue together, you part with goodwill rather than bitterness. It might sound like this. Even though this chapter is ending, I want you to know that I truly hope you find what makes you happy. I wish peace for you. I wish love for you. I wish you find someone who cherishes you in all the ways you deserve. And let me pause here, because I know this is where resistance can rise in many men. Why should I say that? Why should I offer a blessing when I'm hurt too, when maybe I feel misunderstood or unfairly judged? when perhaps I was the one who felt neglected or unseen? The answer is this. This final gesture is not about excusing the past or pretending everything was perfect. It's about who you choose to be in this moment. It's about your own emotional integrity. By offering a genuine blessing, you free yourself from carrying residual resentment. You allow yourself to leave the relationship with your heart clean, your conscience clear. You close the chapter gracefully, not grudgingly. And this blessing doesn't need to sound grandiose or poetic. It simply needs to sound real, authentic, spoken from a place inside you that acknowledges the shared humanity of this other person sitting before you. Because in the end, what she really wants is not an apology alone, not a perfect explanation, not even an invitation to come back. What she wants deep down is to know that this relationship, however imperfect, meant something. That her time, her love, her vulnerability were not wasted. That she will not be remembered as someone you needed to get away from, but as someone who mattered. This is where real closure happens, not in carefully worded texts, not in exhaustive explanations of what went wrong, but in these subtle emotional gestures that honor both your humanity and hers. So take a moment as you prepare to end this conversation and ask yourself, can I leave her better than I found her, even now? Can I offer a parting word that sends her on her way not diminished but restored, not rejected but honored? Because what you will discover, often to your surprise, is that this final act of generosity is not just for her. It's also for you. It's what allows you to leave the relationship with your head high, your heart whole, and your future clear. This is the energy that separates a man who simply exits a relationship from a man who completes one. Completion is powerful. Completion gives you freedom, not just from her, but from the emotional residue that unfinished business leaves behind. And when you've truly completed this interaction, when you've offered your presence, your validation, your ownership, your emotional proof, and your blessing, then something beautiful happens. Relationship itself becomes integrated into your story, not as a wound, but as a chapter of growth. It ceases to haunt you or pull at you in the quiet hours of the night, because you have done what few people ever do. You've closed it not just practically, but emotionally, spiritually, and humanely. And as you stand up from that conversation, whether it's the last talk you have in person, or the last message you send, you will feel it too. You will feel lighter, clearer, calmer. You will feel that you have given what was needed, that you have met her not with detachment but with grace. This is the paradox of closure. The more you resist offering the reaction she's seeking, the longer she will remain entangled in this ending, but the more you lean into these moments, the sooner. You will both find peace. So here's what I leave you with. Every relationship you eggs, it is an opportunity to practice this art. To become the kind of man who doesn't run from discomfort, who doesn't hide behind explanations, who doesn't use cold detachment as a shield, but who meets endings with presence, care, and grace. And when you become that man, you'll find that every relationship you leave, whether it lasted 3 months or 3 decades, becomes a stepping stone toward becoming more whole yourself. Because in the end, it's not about whether she moves on or whether she lets go. It's about whether you can look back without regret, knowing that you met her as fully at the end as you did at the beginning. So if you find yourself in this moment, this fragile emotional moment when she asks for closure, remember, she doesn't want just answers. She wants presence, validation, ownership, emotional proof, and finally, your blessing. When you offer those, you offer something rare and beautiful, and you both get to walk away not as people escaping each other, but as people who honored what was.